I want to turn our attention now just to the role of the leader in an organization to set the tone as a champion for diversity and inclusion. And this I'm going to ask all of you. And in fact, if you have even a story that illustrates a leader, whether it's yourself or someone else in your organization who has been a strong champion for diversity and inclusion, I'd like you to tell us, how do, as a leader, do you personally champion diversity and inclusion? We'll start with Mandy.
Well, for the most part, I guess I try to lead by example. You know, some of you may know I'm not from here. I moved here 7 years ago, not knowing, my husband and I, not knowing a single person, the only female in my industry. So I knew that if I got involved in the community, this is the kind of community that you can be really successful in. So for diversity and inclusion, I would even broaden that outside of just my office to we really try to do a lot of community work. Much like everyone else up here, but each year we fundraise for a local nonprofit, and it has grown so much. The first year we only raised, I think, $3,000, and this year we're expecting to raise $30,000 for Foundation for Youth. So by the end of this year, we will have donated over $80,000 over the last couple years to all local organizations. And usually we do pick an organization that supports, you know, an underserved segment of our community.
Sandra, same question. How do you as a leader champion diversity and inclusion?
Well, I speak in platitudes a lot. Like I'll say, you know, diversity is about the people, things like that, to try to inspire people. But also, on a more serious note, I'm not afraid to say the thing that people are thinking but don't necessarily want to say. So I don't mind, you know, making the group uncomfortable. I try not to go too far with it. But so for all the guys, if you could close your ears really quickly. For the women, though, if you've been in a meeting, I'm sure it's happened where a man has said something and it sounds a little sexist and you're not exactly sure. And so you make eye contact with another woman in the room and she's like, and so we're like, okay, yeah, we know, yeah, he did just say that. And so I don't mind being the person to say, well, I need a little clarification. Did I just hear you say, and to kind of start that conversation. But the reality is when you do that, it does make people uncomfortable. And so setting aside, and in turn, it would make me uncomfortable that people are now uncomfortable because of what I said. So setting aside my own level of comfort for the greater purpose of getting that out and moving forward and trying to make it clear what's acceptable and what's not, because a lot of times, sometimes people say things like that on purpose, but most of the time they don't even realize that they've offended anyone in the room. They just think it came into their mind, they think it's normal. And so to help people, and not that it's not normal, but I hope you know what I mean. And so to try to advance that conversation. And then sometimes it happens a little bit more organically. So I'm actually a patient at Mandy's chiropractic clinic. Little plug for her. They really are nice people too. And so you're welcome. And so there was this conversation that came up with me and one of the doctors, or I was telling him about a conference I went to, and I was explaining, I was like, oh yeah, it's super liberal conference, to the point where everyone has their pronouns on their name tag. And he was like, what are pronouns? What do you mean by that? And so we got into this whole conversation. And over the course of a couple sessions of me going back, I kept asking him about his pronouns. And it wasn't like calling him out or making him, or at least that was not my intent, to make him uncomfortable. But I saw it as an opportunity because a lot of people are not aware that different people use different pronouns. And so it got to be a thing. And the last time I brought it up to him, and I promised I wouldn't bring it up anymore, I came and he was wearing a name tag with, they weren't the right pronouns, but he was showing me that he was listening. And so I appreciated that. So taking opportunities like that to educate each other and to just be open and honest are some of the ways that I try to be a champion.
That's good. Jim?
Yeah, I think it was said already, I think it starts with leading by example. is the way I personally try to champion diversity, inclusion, welcoming. And I think it begins with relationships as well. Because I think if you know somebody a bit more than passing them in the hallway and looking at their name badge, but really can establish a connection, it makes it much more difficult to perhaps have some of those rather insensitive comments and the like. And so as leaders, you know, first and foremost, you know, we all in our leadership roles have a certain positional authority and all, and and that was one of the things that struck me the most moving into the CEO role, is all of a sudden now I'm seen as the CEO when, you know, hey, I want to just be known as Jim, right? And we're all in the organization for a specific reason. We've got specific role and responsibility, but I think we've got to position ourselves as approachable, for one. And as much as I'd like to say, you know, we've made a lot of progress around diversity and welcoming and all that, I don't think we're ever done. And so many things happening in the environment in that, and I think we've got to make sure as leaders we keep ourselves approachable, so that if there are issues that arise, that they can be surfaced without fear, and actually that can get to individuals in the organization that can help address those and do something about them. So I think another element to that is transparency, and I think that helps build the approachability. You know, I spend a lot of my time in just communication and being transparent with the entire workforce, and sometimes maybe almost to a fault, about what is happening in the organization. We take a philosophy, and certainly Columbus Regional Health has had a number of items in the news lately. My goal is that our workforce never reads about something happening at Columbus Regional Health in the newspaper first, that they know what's going on in the organization ahead of the rest of the community. And I think that's very important, and I think that helps build trust, that approachability, so that as issues come up in the work environment and that our employees feel like, you know, if they have to, they can email or call the CEO, and trust me, that happens. And I think that's important for all leaders to be able to set that tone in their organization. I, once a quarter, have employee town hall sessions. I think it's important that the employees hear directly from those leading the organization, not only what's going on, but an opportunity to provide feedback as well. So those are some ways that I think are important to help champion diversity. More formally in the community, Columbus Regional Health has a tradition of supporting many great efforts, initiatives, other organizations in the community that help promote diversity, inclusion, and welcoming. So I think as an organization, not only what we do within the walls of our organization, but how we support the community in other events. And I feel as the leader of that organization, we have to step up to that as well for the broader community.
Amy.
Well, I'll try not to repeat some of what they said, and maybe take it just a slightly different angle. I think you asked about mentors or role models, and I'm fortunate to work for a company that's had leaders at the top who are very passionate about diversity. So if you go back when Tim Solso was our CEO, or today Tom Linebarger, for a long time they've focused on that, and they've really pushed us to think differently and how we can do more. And I remember when I was younger in my career, I was still leading teams or leading a group, and we talk about, you know, the diversity and what we wanted in our organization and what the statistics were and why we weren't making more progress on whatever dimension. And I actually then got a little hesitant because we had a focus on women, and I thought, wow, my team's going to think this is pretty self-serving. Me, the woman leader, trying to harp about why we need more women in diversity. And one of those leaders had a good conversation with me about, why I shouldn't feel that way, and why we should understand that, for example, if you just, again, take the women dimension, it's half of the population. And if we don't have a, employee base that is representative, and if we don't attract the best and brightest across all dimensions of the population, we are not going to succeed, and we're not going to be able to serve our customers well. And so it's not just, something that's nice to do only. There's also a business imperative. And whether I'm a woman or someone else is leading the group, it's that same imperative. And so that I shouldn't feel shy about leading in that area. And that was a pivotal moment for me as well. I do think that's one of the things that we also try to push on is when we talk about recruitment, again, about bringing people in an industry that has historically been thought of as a male-driven industry, so kind of a heavy industrial diesel engine company. Again, back when I joined, what you would often hear is, when you would get lists of candidates, well, there aren't any women. Well, women don't go, there aren't women technicians. There aren't women that go into this kind of engineering. They're just not out there. And I think, that obviously wasn't true. And we had to push a little harder to say, no, how do we make sure that we are getting this diverse pool of candidates? Are we at the right institutions? Are we at the right schools? Are we, in this day you'd be saying, are we taking advantage of social media like we could be? Or what are the other tools? And when you started to kind of push back and say, no, I want a broader list of candidates. We're not going forward, go back and bring me a broader list. Then, eventually you find out that you can get a broader list of candidates, a broader pool. And that doesn't mean we're going to compromise on, the capability and qualifications of the people. So we're still going to end up picking the best people for the role. But we want to make sure that at least we've got a diverse group of candidates to pick from. And I think that's one of the things that historically used to be a challenge and used to be sort of the easy way. And, again, people aren't trying to be difficult. Managers or leaders or people are trying to fill a position, and they have real work they need to get done, and they're under a bunch of pressure, and they're trying to get candidates in, and it's hard. And so, they would be very frustrated, as you could imagine, when you say, no, wait, we're not ready to start interviewing, bring some more, make sure we've got a broad group, because they're just trying to get the job filled, and they think they've got some good people. So I think those are an example of areas where sometimes as leaders, you have to push back a little bit and stretch the organization from doing maybe what's just the easiest path to make sure that we're doing the right things.